This is the Neoliberal Around podcast.
Welcome to Caribbean Thought. This is actually lecture 9. And what we're talking about the fact that you guys have had a chance to watch. You guys have had a chance. Okay. All right. So you guys have had a chance to watch it. Sorry, you guys will get a chance to watch Period Poverty. Not next week, but week after next. You get to watch Period Poverty. And the point I'm making here just now is that the government of Jamaica and the Caribbean, not just Jamaica, the Caribbean is enjoying a decrease in poverty. Not just Jamaica, and they're largely for several reasons. One reason is because of Chinese investment. The Chinese investment in Jamaica, the Caribbean. That's one. But of course, we said that we have had investment in the Caribbean before. We've had investment in the Caribbean. We've had investments in the 1960s and 1970s. In the 1950s, Jamaica was supposed to be the pearl of the Caribbean. We found bauxite, but that has not augured well for Jamaica. But irrespective of that, irrespective of that, what we know is that poverty is at 8.2%, and part of the reason is because China's investment, one, and two, IMF. I mean, they're not dealing with the IMF, and they're not dealing with the World Bank. Okay, but we know that they were able to do the kind of economic developments, and employment has picked up significantly in Jamaica. Employment, and in the Caribbean, employment, especially again with the investment, the massive investment over the last couple of years by China. So that we know that there is a huge investment in the Caribbean, not capital investment as well. So we got employment in terms of the call centers. So that's part of the reason why we find that, and the Jamaican government are able to do what they probably would not have been able to do over the past couple of years. Now, when they had the investments, when they had investments from the post-industrial countries, from the global North countries, investments from the UK, investments from the US, investments from these countries, and Canada, they were all tied to conditionalities. And some of you bought the book, congrats, and you guys are reading the book, but they were tied to various conditions were tied, and the film that you're watching speaks to that. Various conditions were tied to the loans or to the investments. And you know some of the conditions. They could not, they had to deunionize certain development investments in education or in certain kind of education, investment in terms of the capital intensive capabilities. Those investments weren't promoted in the Caribbean, in Jamaica. And the kind of investment that was promoted was the investment that involves opening up the economies to allow for penetration, to allow for global North countries to come into the Caribbean to take to establish their wealth and to drain these economies. Okay, but now China, the arrangement with China is different than the arrangement that the Jamaican government had with the IMF or with the global North countries. And China is not really wasn't considered a global North country. It's now considered not even an emerging. No, it's not even an emerging economy now. It's now a dominant economy. But previously they were not. And they were a socialist country or a communist country who advocated the ideals of Marxism vis-a-vis. But what we know is that China does not tied to the hands of the Jamaican government per se. I'm understanding. So they are allowed to modernize. They are allowed to develop. They are allowed to expand. So because of that, the Prime Minister has come out to say that that's why we're able to address poverty. But however, while poverty is at 8.6%, abject poverty is quadrupling. There's a difference. You have poverty. If you make $2.50%, if you earn $2.50 per day in Jamaica, if you earn $2.50 per day in the world, it is considered you're not considered poor. Once you earn $2.50 a day, you're not considered poor. If you earn, but I'm going to tell you this: if you earn $2.50 a day in Jamaica, it's different from if you earn $2.50 here in the US. Okay, all right, or depending on where you are in the Caribbean, because in Barbados you can't earn $2.50 a day. But anyways, if you earn $2.50 per day, you're not poor. And however, so what we're now, so there's that kind of poverty. So 8.2% of the population is now considered them. It's according to statistics, is poor in Jamaica. You guys are going to be doing the other Caribbean islands. So I hope you guys, when you guys present, tell me what the picture is like economically. What's going on in terms of poverty over the last 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years? What's going on in terms of what's going on with poverty? What's going on in terms of the economy? In terms of development? What's happened in terms of social welfare? Do they have pension plans? Do they have social welfare? Part of the problem in the Caribbean is that there wasn't, because that's what has dogged developing countries or global south countries, an inability to invest in welfare programs. But then the society is so bucolic in the Caribbean therefore the way we think about welfare is different. But that's part of what we have to contend with when you look at poverty, is that we talk about poverty at 8.2%. And the reason for that is because of some of the things that Jamaican government and Caribbean people are able to do with the investment from China, and the fact that China is not giving them any kind of conditionalities. China only want their money back. That's it. They just want their money back. They're not telling you to cut this out or to remove that. That's not China, okay? Because China is about investing in people as well. They have lifted millions of people out of poverty over the past 20 years. China was but they have lifted millions of people with what they're doing. So the Caribbean, so that's one of the good things about Chinese investment. Of course, one of the other things that we're talking about, they don't have to cut programs, and now they can focus on capital intensive development, developing the scientific capabilities, and so on. So that is important to note. However, I want to bring to the fore another issue, the issue of abject poverty. So while we celebrate the reduction in poverty throughout the Caribbean, and the reduction in crime and violence per se, but of course, crime and violence, one of the problems in the Caribbean is the inability to maintain numbers low. Okay, say for example, poverty is low now, but for how long can you maintain that? The economy is growing now, but for how long can you maintain that? What about the issue of corruption? The corruption is measured by the CPI, the Corruption Perception Index. I don't know if in this semester we're going to be talking, we'll be able to talk about the Corruption Perception Index. But in previous classes I've talked about the Corruption Perception Index. If you go to YouTube, go to Caribbean Thought, you can type that in. I present a video, and YouTube has a video with that looks at the Corruption Perception Index, and that doctor from UWI that runs the program that have an innovative program that he shares with the Caribbean. But corruption has also been a problem in the Caribbean. So it's not just external forces, but it's internal forces. In fact, when you look at the Corruption Perception Index, majority of the global south countries, or the African black and brown countries, or former colonial countries, most of them are dealing with high levels of corruption. And we know the relative deprivation theory says that where you have high levels of income inequality and poverty, you have high levels of crime and violence, which involves corruption. Again, the relative deprivation theory, which is a Marxist materialist theory that says whenever you have high levels of income inequality and poverty within a society, you have high levels of crime and violence. And that's of course you have that. You find that here in the US, in certain cities where you have a high concentration of African Americans or mixed people who earn at a certain level of the income bracket. And then you go to Jamaica and the Caribbean. we talk about that as well. You see the same kind of, you see the same reality. We talk about the reality of the dark ghetto. So that's important to note. So abject poverty still exists in the global South countries, in the Caribbean today, in Jamaica. Abject poverty, I believe, is far exceeds that of 21%. Okay, abject poverty is not just, these people are not earning $250 per day. They cannot provide for their basics needs, sanitation, so on and so forth. And there's also the issue of period poverty. Period poverty is high. Period poverty is where girls are unable to provide for to supply they have limited access to the supplies or the resources they need in order to help with the period of their menstrual cycle. So adolescent girls don't go to school because they can't wear the Pampers. Sorry, I apologize. They can't get the whatever girls wear. You know what I'm talking about. I am not the best person to talk about this topic. Shelley-Ann Fraser came to the class and she talked about the issue of period poverty, and it's an issue in most developing countries, where many women, young girls are affected by poverty to the point where which affect their education, because they're dealing with period poverty. They don't go to school, they don't get the kind of education they need, and of course it affects their family life because it affects their career, the kind of job that they can get. So that's the issue of period poverty is an issue not just in that has dogged the developing world, in Africa, in the Caribbean, and even in parts of the post-industrial, in vulnerable communities. So there is the issue of period poverty, and I'm saying to you, that's one of the things that I will share with you, not this class, not next class, but if we have time after you guys present, and I can talk a little bit about period poverty. I won't talk about it. I will share a video about it with Shelley-Ann Fraser, who is the head of the Herflow Foundation. I had her as a guest on the podcast and the YouTube channel, and she it was very revealing what she said, and I have to share that particular that presentation with you, because she talks about the fact that how our cultures, how the church also helps to prevent girls from coming out of period poverty, because the issue of masculinity, the issue of sex, men can have conversations about certain things. Okay, so the church, she said that the biggest obstacle to her in terms of her foundation in helping to end period poverty is the church. And so that is something that we have to talk about. That is something that we have to think about. And I'll play that for you later on. Today's class, we're going to be looking at cinema and globalization, looking at how cinema tells the story of the injustices in the world. And so this particular lecture is a recorded lecture that is not available anywhere else. It's only available to the students at JTS or who have access to Caribbean Thought. The video was available on the channel, but we pulled it down because Stephanie Black, who is the producer and the owner of New York Films, is telling me that I do not have any right to do it. I can only share it with the students at JTS. So I purchased the film. I was able to share it to a class, and I've embedded it in this lecture. And you guys will get an opportunity to listen to watch the video today. The beginning of the video is a lecture where I begin to talk about cinema and globalization and the issue of globalization, because the film tells the story of how globalization has disproportionately affected the world. Okay, so depending on where you are from, will determine your outcome. I set this up to a class. I said to somebody the other day, Guyana found oil. Okay, Guyana has oil, and people are rushing to Guyana, I think, over the last 2 years. But right now, and people are thinking that the discovery of Guyana's oil will help Guyana to come into the first century. No, because right now Guyana only makes 12%. 78% go to the post-industrial. You understand what I'm saying? anyway, we can talk about that later on. So here we are, guys. So we will share. So today's class, we will share this video with you, and when we are done with it, you guys can write a quick and do a reflection, an interaction paper. All right, and we are going to. Before I start, any question from you guys? No question. All right. Go ahead.
Sir, so what about those who wrote the reflection and send it to you? Do we have to do it again?
No, you don't have to do it again if you've already done it. But I'm asking you to. But what are your thoughts on the video, on what you've watched? What are your thoughts?
Sir, really, you have to ask them.
Yeah, because you said, what about those people who have already watched it, completed reflection paper, and send it in? So you have completed your reflections. So what are your reflections having watched it?
Sir, how you know semi completed, sir?
You just
I was
based on your question. All right, is anybody in the class, if you've watched it and you completed your reflection, what have you would you like to share briefly about what you've gleaned from the video? Anyone? Well, if you have already submitted it, that's fine. But after watching it today, you may want to watch it. You may want to maybe redo your reflections. You have an opportunity to do that. Okay.
So you mean the one from last week?
Yeah. All right. That's what
we
we're
mean on death and life, right?
Life and death.
Yeah, the life and death.
Life and death. And by the way, life and death. The title of the film that we is Life and Death of that film. It's written by Stephanie. It's produced by Stephanie Black, but it's based on what film, guys? Sorry, it's based on what book? The film Life and Death is based on what book?
Kincaid book.
Based on Jamaica's Kincaid book. What's the title of that book? Huh?
Let me tell you the title, sir.
A Small Place, because we don't have much time. So it's called A Small Place. It's about Antigua and Barbuda, and how their country has been, what their country have to go through since since they got independence up to the 2000s. Okay. Of course, remember that Norman Gervin and Ian Meeks in the Caribbean Reader described the Caribbean as an invention. And of course, you guys were exposed to Ivan Van Sertima's book. They came before Columbus, looking at how Africans came to the Caribbean and African sailors discovered the Caribbean before the Europeans. And not only did they discover, but they had a life here. Now, the members of the Urban Indian Heritage Society don't agree with me. They disagree with me. And obviously, at some point, we're going to have a debate between myself and people of the Urban Indian Heritage Society. You guys, if people from the Urban Indian Heritage Society happen to watch this film, I am not discounting what you are saying, but we're going to have to sit down and have an open discussion about your findings and our findings. Okay? So that's all I'm going to say to that. But Life and Death. So the Life and Death is based on the book by Jamaica Kincaid, A Small Place, about how the IMF, how globalization, how over the last 30 years, how they have been transformed into dependent capitalist economies. Now, the film Life and Death, there's something about the title. Do you know what strikes you about the title? What strikes you about the title of the film?
So when before actually seeing the words, I thought it was life and death as in you die. But then I saw the death and I realized that it has to do with globalization and IMF and all of those things.
Oh, okay. Yes. You thought that it's life and DEATH. Yes?
But
Hello?
sir,
Go ahead.
but in essence, when you look at what they are doing, it's as if you are literally dying because you are barely able to keep your head above the water, and you are those persons who even are striving. They literally kill the business. When you look at the farmers, when you look on the milk industry, when you look on everything, and they plotted their ideology and they carried that out to the T. So it was a play on words for me, even though it was
Who is talking? Who is talking right now? Which
Telica,
student?
sir.
Telika Bernard Rose. That's what I am looking for. That's what I'm looking for. I mean, the title, Life and Death, is a play upon words. And what figurative expression is that? What figurative expression it is? Not an oxymoron. It's not an hyperbole. It starts with P. A play upon words is, what's that? It is a
pun. Is a
there we
pun?
go. There we go. It's a pun. So Stephanie Black, in a succinct, beautiful way, uses imagery, beautiful, in a beautiful way, uses imagery to tell the story. It's a pun. Life and death is a play upon words. Yes, it's life, but it's a life of death. Isn't that interesting? But it's a play upon words because Life and Death, life and death. But for the Caribbean, it's not about our death, is death. We don't live until we die. We live through the experience of death. From Haiti, they levied a debt when they got their independence so that they can keep them down. Yes? And that was always the strategy to help to maintain colonial dominance over the others. Okay, over the former. You want to maintain that former through debt, okay, or through loans with conditionalities and you can't pay it. So debt, life and debt. It's quite interesting. And it's also ironic too, because that's what you get from neoliberalism. When you read the book, when we hear of the Caribbean, we think of beautiful islands of paradise with sun and sea and sand, but it is anything but that. That's irony right there. I use irony in the preface of the book, in the first chapter. In the preface, I use irony in the sense that you think the island of the Caribbean is an island of paradise enjoyed by others. But actually, no. Depending on where you are and who you are and where you are in the world will determine your experience. Say, for example, what's going on in Haiti now. Do you know that people are still flying to Haiti for vacationing in Haiti right now? In Haiti. That's not the local experience. The locals are in turmoil right now. It is a state of emergency. But there are places that people can fly to and enjoy 5-diamond vacation life and then fly back to the US or Germany or wherever. Do you know that? Do you know that, guys? So the question, so you see the irony. Let me give you an example of irony. Fanon in the book Wretched of the Earth. He talks about the fact that in 1944, and in 1944, and if you look at, I sent you guys a timeline of the Caribbean, and in it you see 1955. 1944 was when the United Nations came about, and the key institution was the IMF. Know that. The key institution in 1944, established in 1944 by the United Nations, was the IMF. They were already setting the stage. In 1955, the non-aligned countries, they decided to have their own conference because they weren't at the United Nations and their interests weren't represented. Only the big countries, the former colonial masters, the G7, only their interests were represented. The Caribbean interests, Africa's interests weren't represented. And then by 1955, you have the Revolutionary War of Independence. There is a lot of war going on throughout the world for independence. 1955, the Bandung Conference, where the non-aligned the countries seeking to get independence came together to have their own conference to plan for a new way forward. The nationalists, we call them the nationalists, those who wanted a kind of sovereignty. Okay, they wanted to control their own destinies, wanted their own states. Fanon in Wretched of the Earth says, and Fanon wrote the book in the 1960s, says that you guys are not making any sense. You guys are going to have a conference in 1955, and by 1960, 61, 62, 63, have ceremonies to get your independence. You're going to have a ceremony to get your independence from those who consider themselves better than you, who is now granting you. If the person is granting you freedom and independence, that means that man is still your God. I'm not sure why I'm signing out and I have the best Zoom. I think I signed into another Zoom and not my Georgetown Zoom. So in 10 minutes, we may go off and we might have to log back in. But I was making a very important point. What was the point? I'm going somewhere with this. What was the point I was making? Help me, guys. Where was I just now?
So you said that if somebody is
Fanon, yes. Fanon says they don't know what they're doing. The kind of independence that the Caribbean was to have was one where they rewrite the history of man. One where they rewrite the history of man. That's the kind of independence that they wanted. One where they rewrite the history of man. One where they begin as tabula rasas, as blank slates. And that's what Fanon was getting at. But Fanon says, and Homi Bhabha talks about Fanon says that the Caribbean was looking for a new history of man. So here they are looking on the horizons for independent nations. In 1955, they were looking for they wanted independent nations, and they were dreaming up new nation states. Fanon said, no, you don't want nations like how the fathers give it to you, like how the colonial masters. You want something new. Don't let them hand it to you like gifts. Because if they hand it to you for you to continue what they give you, it's for them to maintain dominance over you. Okay? And that is what defies Haiti and Cuba. Because Haiti and Cuba they are not part of the geopolitical region. They don't enjoy the safety, the wealth, the peace, the relative peace in our region compared to Jamaica, Barbados, Guyana, because their independence was via a revolution. But all the other Caribbean countries, they had ceremonies. Okay? But anyway, let's move forward. I'm talking about irony here. Here are these countries, Caribbean countries, and non-aligned countries looking for their independence. In 1955, they had the Bandung Conference. They had a dream of a new world, of a new nation that is non-aligned, that is not attached to Europe. Free independent nations. By the 1960s, they got their independence. But the independence wasn't the independence that Fanon and many people thought that they should have gotten. Because by the 1970s, all these independent, vulnerable, small countries met with OPEC. The oil producing energy countries decided to slash oil production. They slashed oil production, driving up the oil of price. The Caribbean, they don't have oil, and this is in US dollars. Okay, what happens? They don't have money. So now the US, all these countries, the Caribbean countries, these non-aligned countries that now got independence, that were separate independent countries, independently negotiated with the global North or the IMF or the World Bank, independently, tying them to conditions which ultimately created them into dependent capitalist economies, which is why we have brain drain, which is why we have going on at the border right now in the US. why we have high levels of poverty compared to other countries in certain parts of the Caribbean, and so on. Okay, but I said in 1957, 58, the plan was to not go it alone, but was for these dependent nations who want independence to develop a corporation, a unity, a federation. You might have heard about the West Indies. So prior to independence in 1960s, many Caribbean countries were talking about a West Indian federation. So they weren't supposed to be a Jamaica, they were Barbados, a Guyana. We were supposed to be one. But somewhere down the line, we talk about the issue of people wanting to stroke their own egos, stroking your own egos or striking your ego. Okay. So the thing is, and that is the problem with nationalism. Nationalism there's a positive to nationalism. In 1955, everybody wanted nationalism, but the issue of nation states is a European or Eurocentric idea, which creates opportunities for domination and control. What the Caribbean or what these countries needed in the 1950s were stronger, united countries that could stave off what was happening in the 1970s. So here they are dreaming about independent countries, not knowing that in the 1970s, OPEC was going to hit them. Oil production, shortage of oil production is going to hit them. Economic crisis is going to hit them. So if they had decided to go along with the West Indian Federation and not go along with the nationalists who wanted independent nation states because everybody wanted power, and that's the problem here, with these nationalists. They all went into ego trips and they all want their own power. Jamaica nationalists wanted their own nation and everybody wanted a capital in their own place. So these countries, they couldn't get along, it seems. And so they decided to go it alone. But if we had gone along with the West Indian Federation in the 1950s, 60s, by the 1970s, we could have negotiated loans together as one with the IMF, or we could have created a plan together. But the Caribbean have a problem. The Caribbean, our size, the vulnerability of the Caribbean put us at a disadvantage to be able to compete with the world and to maintain. And where we are starting from, where the Caribbean is starting from, they are starting from the 1960s. They're coming out of colonialism. Okay, so what is needed is a strong union, which they never. And so the footing that we started on was the wrong footing. And so that's the issue of irony. The issue of irony here is that they got independence, okay, free nation, and by the time the 1970s, they had to go to the IMF, which ultimately meant structural adjustment. And what do we say structural adjustment? According to Ramesh Ramsawan, structural adjustment or globalization ultimately meant opening up their economies to allow for penetration. Yes, and that's what happened. And created debt. And created debt, which allows them which ties them forever, ties them to the post-industrial. So they negotiated independence. But before 1955 and before 1960s, there was 1944. They had already planned to give the Caribbean independence because we were fighting for it. But they were planning to maintain their dominance, to maintain the status quo by starting the United Nations in 1945 and establishing the IMF. And by talking about neoliberal globalization through structural adjustment. Okay? And so this film, Life and Death, and the book, Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty and Resistance, speak to some of these issues. And today we will share that with you. Okay? All right? So now we are going to share the video. The video is two hours long. So if you guys need a quick break, let me know. We're going to go straight through. All right? We may stop for breaks, actually, as we go through the video. All right? So we're about to, I'm going to share the screen, go back to sharing the screen, and we will share the computer sound. And here we go. If you read your book, Cinema, if you read the book, Neoliberalism,